Picture this. You are the most powerful man in the world. You sit on a throne that stretches from the deserts of Arabia to the mountains of Eastern Europe. 1,000 soldiers stand ready to die for you at a single word. Entire kingdoms have fallen before you. Empires that existed for centuries, gone, erased, because you decided they should not exist anymore. And yet, every single night before you close your eyes, you do something that no peasant, no beggar, no slave in your empire has to do. You check under your bed. You look at the food before it touches your lips and you wonder, is today the day? You look at the men who have served you for decades, men who have fought beside you in battle, men who have watched you conquer half the known world, and you wonder which one of them is planning to put a knife between your ribs, because you know better than anyone alive what men are capable of. You know because you did it yourself. You poisoned your own father. You watched your brothers die screaming. You ordered the execution of 7 of your own sons, your own blood. Children you held as infants, and you did not lose a single night of sleep over it. And the one son you left alive, you spent his entire childhood making him watch. This is not a story about a madman. This is not a story about a tyrant who lost his mind. This is a story about a man who looked at power with completely clear eyes, understood exactly what it cost, and decided, without hesitation, that he was willing to pay every single penny. This is Selim I, the man his own people called Yavuz, the Grim. In just 8 years on the throne, he tripled the size of the Ottoman Empire, became the most powerful ruler on earth, and left behind a son named Suleiman, who the world would call magnificent. Built entirely on the foundation of blood that Selim laid down, history remembers Suleiman. History remembers Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who connected them. History almost forgot him. We are fixing that today. To understand Selim the Grim, you first have to understand the Ottoman system he was born into, because it operated on rules so brutal, so coldly logical, that even the people living inside it struggled to accept them. Selim was born in 1470. His father was Sultan, Bayezid II, almost the exact opposite of his own father, Mehmed the Conqueror. Where Mehmed was fire and conquest, Bayezid was calm, philosophical, passive. He preferred poetry to warfare. He invited Jewish refugees from Spain into his empire while the rest of Europe burned them. He consolidated rather than conquered. To many, this made Bayezid wise. To Selim, it made him weak. But before we reach that conflict, before we get to the moment a son decided his father needed to die, we need to understand what the Ottoman court actually was. Because it was not a place of warmth and family dinners. It was one of the most politically dangerous environments in human history. Here is something most people do not know. When a new sultan took the throne, he was legally not just permitted, but actually encouraged to execute all of his brothers. Every single one. The logic was simple and horrifying. Brothers meant rivals. Rivals meant civil war. Civil war meant the empire fractured. So the solution was clean. You take the throne. You send the executioners. The empire survives intact. This was not whispered policy. This was written into Ottoman law, formalized, normalized, accepted. Mehmed the Conqueror himself had codified it. Had his own infant brother drowned immediately after taking power and wrote fratricide into the imperial legal code as the responsible choice for any new ruler. Think about what it means to grow up in a family where this is the law. Selim had multiple brothers. Every one of them was, by the logic of the system they all lived inside, either his future victim or his future killer. There was no brotherhood in the Ottoman palace. Every smile from a sibling was potentially the last smile before the executioners came. Selim understood this from childhood, and unlike many around him, he did not look away from it. He was made governor of Trabzon, a province on the Black Sea coast, far from Constantinople, remote, cold, distant from power. His brothers received better postings closer to the capital, with larger armies and more political influence. Some men would have accepted this quietly. Selim fought, constantly, against the Safavid Persians to the east, against local rulers, against anyone who presented a threat or an opportunity. While his father wrote poetry in Constantinople and his brothers played political games in comfortable provinces, Selim was hardening himself in actual combat. His soldiers loved him, the way soldiers love commanders, who share their danger rather than directing it from a distance. He ate what they ate, slept in the same conditions, fought on the front lines. He was physically imposing, broad-shouldered, thick mustache, and eyes that every contemporary chronicler mentioned with unsettling consistency. Friend and enemy alike described them the same way, intense, unblinking. The eyes of a man who had decided something about the world and was not interested in being talked out of it. He also developed in these years the habit that would define and curse his reign. He began to trust no one, not as philosophy, not as caution, as a permanent, absolute state of being. He had seen too much. He knew the system too well. He understood that the men closest to him were always the men most capable of destroying him. So he watched. He calculated. He maintained a continuous mental register of every person in his circle and their loyalty. This was not paranoia. He would prove the threats were real, repeatedly. By the early 1500s, Bayezid II was old and visibly failing. Gout had been crippling him for years. He was carried on a palanquin to public appearances. In the Ottoman world, a weakened sultan was an invitation. Selim had three main rivals for the succession: his brothers Ahmed, Korkut, and Shahinsa. Ahmed was the eldest, the favored one, the man who had spent years cultivating the right relationships at court. Selim made a different calculation. In 1511, he marched his army toward Constantinople. Let that land. He marched his own army toward his father's capital, an act that meant only one thing: open military rebellion against the sitting sultan. Bayezid's response was not to crush his son. It was to negotiate. He offered Selim a better province. He tried to buy him off. Selim refused and retreated to Crimea to regroup. What happened next pivots on something as unpredictable as institutional loyalty. The Janissaries, the elite Ottoman military corps, the most feared fighting force in the region, began making their preference known. They wanted Selim. They were professional soldiers who had spent decades watching Bayezid's passive reign, and they wanted what soldiers always want in a commander: who would actually use them. Selim's reputation from Trabzon had spread. He was the one who fought. He was the one who would take the empire somewhere worth going. When the Janissaries shifted their loyalty openly, the political math changed completely. Bayezid, aging, barely walking, watching his military abandon him in real time, understood what was happening. He summoned Selim back from Crimea in April of 1512 in a ceremony that was either abdication or surrender. Depending on how you read the sources, Bayezid formally transferred power to his son. He then left Constantinople to travel to his birth province. He never arrived. He died on the road, 2 months after his abdication. The official cause was illness. He was old. He was sick. This was plausible. But the timing was extraordinary. And the Ottoman court ran on poison the way other courts ran on politics. The tools were different. The mechanics were identical. Selim had both the motive and the access. Nobody has ever proven it definitively. The sources whisper. Historians debate. The road to Didymotico keeps its secret. What is not debated is what happened to Selim's brothers the moment he took power. Ahmed, the favored heir, was hunted down and strangled. His sons executed alongside him. Korkut, the philosophical brother, the one least interested in power, he fled, was eventually caught, strangled. Shahinsa was already dead, but his sons were executed anyway. The method was consistent: strangulation with a silk bowstring. No blood. In Ottoman tradition, royal blood was not supposed to touch the ground. Even in death, there were protocols. Within months of taking the throne, Selim had cleared the board completely. His father was dead. His brothers were dead. Their sons were dead. Every legitimate rival, every man who could plausibly claim the Ottoman throne was gone. He had not been Sultan for a full year. He was just getting started. Here is a story Ottoman historians recorded that tells you everything about how Selim operated. One night, early in his reign, Selim had a dream. In the dream, one of his ministers, a man who had served him loyally, was plotting against him. Vivid, specific, disturbing. Selim woke up. He summoned the minister. He had him executed, not investigated, not questioned, not given the opportunity to defend himself against an accusation that originated in a dream. Executed. You might hear this and think, this is madness, this is irrational. But here is what complicates that reading. During his 8-year reign, Selim executed 7 Grand Viziers. 7. The Grand Vizier was the second most powerful position in the empire. Executing one in a reign was notable. 2 was alarming. 7 was a statement. It reached the point it meant. Ottoman court historians recorded this because it was real enough to enter the official record, where being appointed Grand Vizier under Selim became something men had to be pressured into accepting. One account describes a newly appointed Grand Vizier going home immediately to put his affairs in order before reporting for his first day of work, because he considered it a reasonable precaution. Selim's reported response to learning his ministers lived in constant fear. He considered it appropriate. Comfortable ministers became lazy. Lazy ministers became corrupt. Corrupt ministers became a threat. Fear kept them sharp. This was his management philosophy. Now apply that logic to his sons. Selim had at least 8 sons. 7 of them were executed by their father's order. 1 survived, Suleiman, the boy who would reign for 46 years. Who would commission the greatest architecture in Ottoman history? Who would be called magnificent by an entire civilization? He survived because Selim chose him. Because Selim looked at his sons and made a calculation, which one can carry what I am building? The answer was Suleiman. The others were structural weaknesses. Multiple sons meant multiple potential successors. Multiple successors meant civil war the moment he died. Civil war meant the empire he was building at extraordinary speed would fracture the moment he was no longer there to hold it together by personal force. So he eliminated the problem himself, clearly, deliberately. The fact that the problem was made of his own children did not change the calculation. This was not emotion. This was architecture. In 1514, Selim declared war on the Safavid Empire. The Safavids were the dominant power to the east, a Persian dynasty that had risen rapidly under Shah Ismail I, a man who combined genuine military brilliance with almost messianic religious authority. He had united the Persian world under Shia Islam and had been expanding aggressively into territories the Ottomans considered theirs. The religious dimension made it explosive. The Ottomans were Sunni, the Safavids were Shia, and Ismail had been actively preaching among Ottoman subjects, converting communities inside Ottoman borders, creating a potential 5th column of Shia sympathizers that Selim could not ignore. Before he marched his army east, he did something that shocked even hardened observers of the Ottoman court. He had approximately 40,000 people within his own empire killed. Anatolian Shia Muslims, Ottoman subjects, executed on the grounds that they represented potential instability, a population that might side with the Safavids when the armies met. He did not want to fight a war while worrying about what was happening behind him, so he eliminated the concern, completely, permanently. 40,000 people. Then he marched. The campaign that followed was a masterpiece of military strategy. Selim understood something crucial about the Safavid position. Ismail's strength was built on cavalry, mobile, fast, devastating in open engagement. The Safavids fought the way steppe warriors had always fought, using speed and open space. Selim had cannons. He had Janissary infantry with firearms. These weapons were devastating but had one weakness. They were slow to reload. If cavalry got close enough, the advantage disappeared. So Selim did not let them get close. At the Battle of Chaldiran in August 1514, he deployed his cannons in a line and chained them together, wagon to wagon, an artificial defensive wall. Behind it, janissaries with firearms. In front, open ground that the Safavid cavalry had to cross. Shah Ismail led his cavalry in the charge that had defeated every enemy he had ever faced. The cannons fired. Then the Janissary rifles fired. The Safavid cavalry broke. The charge that had seemed unstoppable was stopped before it reached Ottoman lines. Selim advanced. He captured Tabriz, the Safavid capital. He looted it. He sent back to Constantinople the craftsmen, artists, scholars, architects, the human capital of Persian civilization that would enrich the Ottoman court for generations. Ismail escaped but never recovered. He withdrew from public life, turned to alcohol, became a diminished shadow of the messianic figure he had been. He never faced the Ottomans in open battle again. Selim had broken him. If Chaldiran was impressive, what came next was world-altering. In 1516, 2 years after the Safavid campaign, Selim turned south. The Mamluk Sultanate controlled Egypt, Syria, and the Levant. They were one of the most storied military dynasties in history, the people who had stopped the Mongols, the only major power in the medieval world to defeat the Mongols in open battle. They had expelled the Crusaders from the Holy Land. They controlled the most lucrative trade routes connecting east to west. Wealthy, experienced, proud. Selim destroyed them in 2 battles. The first at Majd Dabik in Syria in August 1516 was almost a replay of Chaldiran. The Mamluk Sultan led his cavalry against Ottoman lines. The cannons and firearms broke the charge the same way they had broken the Safavids. The Sultan himself died in the battle, killed by the fighting or by a stroke from watching his army disintegrate before technology he had no answer for. Syria fell. Damascus and Aleppo opened their gates. The second battle, at Ridaniya near Cairo in January 1517, finished it. The new Mamluk Sultan tried to neutralize Selim's advantage by deploying his own captured Ottoman cannons in a defensive line, fighting fire with fire. Selim flanked him. The Ottoman army came around the defensive position from the side. The cannons could not cover. The Mamluk army collapsed. The Sultan fled, was captured, and was brought before Selim. He was hanged at the gates of Cairo. Egypt was Ottoman, and with Egypt came something that transformed Selim's power. Beyond territory or wealth, it came with a title. In Cairo, the last heir of the Abbasid Caliphate, a ceremonial figurehead maintained by the Mamluks as a symbol of Islamic legitimacy, formally transferred the title of Caliph to Selim. Caliph, the successor to the Prophet, the leader of all Sunni Muslims on earth. Selim already controlled Mecca and Medina. He controlled Jerusalem. He controlled Egypt's agricultural wealth and the trade routes. He had checked the Safavids and eliminated the Mamluks in 8 years. 8 years from taking the throne to becoming, by any reasonable measure, the most powerful and influential ruler alive. We have spent a lot of time on what Selim did. Now let us spend some time on who he was, because the picture is more complicated than a simple monster. Selim wrote poetry in Persian, the literary language of prestige in the Ottoman world. His poems, collected in a formal divan, were considered genuinely accomplished. They are dark poems, contemplative, dealing with fate, power, impermanence, death, which given his biography feels less like artistic affectation and more like honest self-reflection. He had a mordant, pitch-black sense of humor that his chroniclers recorded with visible admiration and terror simultaneously. Multiple accounts describe him making jokes about executions, sometimes about the very men he was about to have killed. Whether these stories are historically precise or have grown in the retelling, they circulated widely and were considered characteristic. His court believed them, which shaped how everyone around him behaved. He was also a commander who genuinely shared his soldiers' hardships. During the Mamluk campaign crossing the Sinai in winter, Selim reportedly refused to sleep inside while his soldiers slept outside. His men would follow him anywhere because they believed, correctly, that he was not the kind of commander who directed suffering from a distance. He is also credited with being a genuine visionary about the long-term structure of his empire. The administrative reforms he implemented, the standardization of legal and financial systems, the integration of newly conquered territories, these were not the work of a man solely interested in destruction. He was building something. The architecture was deliberate and forward, looking even when the construction materials were human lives. He knew he was going to die young. The sources describe him saying so. He had a carbuncle, a serious skin infection, on his back that was causing significant health problems by 1520. He was 50 years old and had lived as hard as any man alive. He died in September 1520 on campaign. Of course he died on campaign. 8 years on the throne. He had started with an empire. He had tripled it. Before we close, I want to trace one thread forward, because this channel builds connected history, and the thread from Selim to Suleiman is not just biographical, it is psychological. Suleiman grew up watching his father. He watched a man execute his uncles and his brothers, who killed his own father, who had sons strangled with silk bowstrings one by one until only Suleiman remained, who looked at every man closest to him with permanent suspicion and executed them based on dreams. Suleiman watched all of this from childhood. Then Suleiman became the most powerful man in the world, and here is what happened. He executed his best friend, Ibrahim Pasha, a man he had known since childhood, elevated to Grand Vizier, given more power than any Grand Vizier before him, called his closest companion and his brother, was strangled in 1536. The reasons are debated. The method was his father's. He executed his own son. Mustafa, his eldest, most popular, the prince the Ottoman public and the Janissaries adored, the obvious successor, was strangled in 1553 on accusations of treason that most historians consider fabricated. Selim had killed his sons. Suleiman killed his. The pattern Selim established: eliminate threats before they materialize, trust no one completely, maintain power through fear, ran in Suleiman's blood. Suleiman is remembered as magnificent, and he was, but inside the magnificence was the shadow of his father. Inside the poetry and architecture and long wise reign, inside all of that, was a man who had learned from the best and worst teacher imaginable. The grim. Selim I reigned for 8 years. In those 8 years he defeated the Safavid Persian Empire. He destroyed the Mamluk Sultanate. He became Caliph of all Sunni Muslims. He tripled the size of the Ottoman Empire. He executed his father, his brothers, their sons, 7 Grand Viziers, 7 of his own sons, and 40,000 of his own subjects. He died at 50 on campaign, still moving forward. History remembered his son, but the son was built on the father. The magnificence stood on the grimness. And that is perhaps the darkest truth of this entire story. Not that a monster existed, but that the monster worked. That the cold calculations added up correctly. That the blood paid for something real and lasting. We do not have to admire it, but we should understand it, because power has always worked this way. The mechanisms have changed. The silk bowstrings have been replaced by other instruments. But the logic, the cold, unflinching logic of men who decide that nothing is too costly in the pursuit of dominance. That logic did not die with Selim the Grim. It never dies. If this video made you think, if it connected something from the Mehmed video or the Suleiman video in a new way, share it with someone who loves history. Subscribe if you are not already here, because we are building something with this channel. A connected portrait of power and darkness across history, and every video adds another piece. Next time we are going to a city, the most advanced city in the medieval Islamic world. A place so far ahead of its time that what happened to it in 1 week in 1258 is still one of the greatest losses in human civilization. The Mongols came to Baghdad, and they left nothing standing. See you there.